Thank you, Phil. Hi, everybody. My name's Don, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm just really grateful to be here. We got a great lineup of speakers. I'm sorry that my schedule is such that I'm hit and miss on what I can be here for, but Jennifer, I caught the last part of Jennifer's, and it was just great. And I know most of the folks you've got coming up after me. So after you get through this hour, you really got some good speakers coming up. And I'm supposed to talk about 6 and 7. I promise I will. But I always like to give a little background as to how I got to there. I was born and raised on a tobacco farm in southwestern Kentucky, and I thought until I got sober that I had a really unique, interesting, and romantic childhood and subsequent rise to power. Turned out it was all a bunch of crap. My capacity for self-delusion is astounding. And if I haven't done what I need to do today to maintain my spiritual condition and get my daily reprieve, I'll go right back to my default position. And in my default position, I'm absolutely full of self-delusion. What was really going on that first 12 or 13 years of my life was the ego disorder that's been at the center of my life every day of my 76 years, drunk and sober. By the way, I didn't say that my sobriety date is April the 9th of 1981. I have a sponsor. I sponsor folks. Bob B. of St. Paul, Minneapolis is my sponsor. My home group is the Calm Down Group, which meets right across the river from downtown Louisville, Kentucky, where I live. And a couple of other guys and I started that group about 35 years ago, and I named it because it meets on Wednesday, and by Wednesday, I really needed to calm down. But at any rate, back to what was really going on in my childhood and early life and throughout my life was the ego disorder. The big book uses a little different words. It says that our selfishness and self-centeredness are the root of our troubles. And to me, that is that ego disorder. And without divine intervention, that disorder of mine will make me so obsessed with myself. Makes me so obsessed with how I believe I stack up with other people. And it makes me so obsessed with how I feel that for decades I boiled the bedrock of my alcoholism along with the ego disorder and intertwined with it down to one sentence. And I stick by that as being the basis of where it starts from. And that one sentence is this: without divine intervention, I will always wind up letting how I feel be the most important thing in the world. Now, without divine intervention, I can give lip service to something being more important, and I might be able to, just for a little while, put up a facade. But if I haven't done the work I need to do today, and if I've learned anything in my time in AA, I've learned that I don't get much divine intervention on Saturday based on what I did on Friday. It's just truly a day at a time deal. And if I haven't done what I need to do, I'll go right back to that default position of letting how I feel be the most important thing in the universe. And not only did I not realize that that's basically sociopathic, I didn't realize that there was any other way that a human being could live other than letting how they felt be the most important thing in the world to them. When my original sponsor first told me, Don, you let the way you feel be the most important thing in the world, I remember my reaction was, well, why is he talking about this? But of course, it's the most important thing. It's the most important thing to everybody. But it turns out it's not. And all that obsession with myself always creates so much pain and emptiness and difference and apartness down inside me that I couldn't stand the way I felt inside. And constantly had to be running as hard as I could and or stuffing something in there to try to make me feel good enough that I could stand it. And that was really what was going on the first 12 or 13 years, was a totally self-obsessed kid, desperately trying to stay half a step ahead of a screaming fit. Got drunk the first time, and of course, the magic happened. Didn't know the magic had happened. All I knew when I woke up the next morning, terrified, sicker than I'd ever been in my life, that before I got in all that trouble, before I threw up, before I blacked out, before I passed out, I had passed through a right pleasant neighborhood. But after I got sober 25 years later, I realized that that was the magic. Because what had happened, for the first time in my life, I had found something that made me feel the way I needed to feel. And for the first time in my life, I had peers. You see, without divine intervention, I don't have any peers on this earth, because that ego disorder of mine makes me an egomaniac with an inferiority complex. And what I mean by that is that without divine intervention, I'm perfectly capable of feeling too good for somebody or something, and at the same instant knowing I'm not nearly good enough for that same thing or that same person. All my life I've known I could do anything. And at the same time, I've always known I couldn't really do anything. And that's been bouncing around in the old crazy picture show in my head for 76 years. But you see, without divine intervention, I cannot be a fellow among fellows. I can't be eyeball to eyeball with you. I can be above you. I can be below you. And insanely, I can be both at the same time. But I can't be a fellow among fellows. But part of the magic was, when I got enough of that booze in me, I was a fellow among fellows. I was okay with me. I was okay with you. So my powerlessness over alcohol and in the latter years and things like it holds absolutely no mystery for me. In fact, I think it's a no-brainer. It couldn't have been any other way. Because for the next 25 years after that first drunk, I didn't know that there was anything else in this world that could make me feel the way I needed and wanted to feel. Make me feel good enough inside that I could stand it without running as hard as I could and or trying to stuff something in there. So the bottom line was sociopathically and tragically simple. When I wanted to change to feel the way I feel badly enough, it simply did not matter what it cost, and it did not matter who it cost, because the way I feel is the most important thing on this earth without divine intervention. And I can assure you, in the next 25 years after that first drunk, I wasn't interested in any divine intervention. I had never entertained any idea that there might be a higher power that had anything to do with my life. I know this sounds insane, but it's true. At 4 years old, I remember sitting in a Baptist church down the road from the farm where I was born and grew up. And I remember still believing in Santa Claus and not buying one single word that preacher, Brother Lyons, was saying. Don't know where that came from. But I spent the first 37 years of my life as an evangelical agnostic. It was part of my mission to disabuse the superstitious of their superstitions. And what was really happening, you know, alcohol and the things like it are a pathetic imitation, but they're a substitute for God. What I was trying to do, I was trying to fill up a God-shaped hole with all those people, the places, things, situations, with alcohol, with everything else. Trying to fill up a God-shaped hole that nothing will fill up but God. I'm not going to tell my story. From that first drunk until I got sober at 37, alcohol dominated everything in my life. I was born with some academic gifts. Despite being drunk 2 or 3 nights a week, from the time I got drunk until I was 16, I wound up an early admission student to college at 16 without finishing high school and with an academic scholarship. And my reaction to that was stay so drunk the first semester I lost all concept of day and night. just a matter of passing out and coming to. So I blew the scholarship, and then for 7.5 years, I worked full-time, went to school full-time, drank full-time, and somehow got through undergraduate, graduate, and law school. And I have no idea how that happened. I don't even have two clear memories of that whole 8 years. It's just a swirling gray mass of alcoholic insanity. But I continued to stumble uphill. I had a materially successful criminal defense law practice for 10 years. Little lawyer of a little law firm of 10 lawyers that built up around this other fellow and me. I got full of scotch, vodka, and 4 outside issues on February 10th of 1978. Drove a Corvette off the road to over 120, did horrible things to my body. Didn't practice law for 5 years, lost absolutely everything. The guys had to kick me out of the law firm that I had founded because my behavior brought so much pressure on them. The state of Kentucky jerked my law license right after that. The first year after that wreck, I had a half dozen major surgeries. I didn't have a urinary function for the first year after the wreck, and they told me that that could not be restored. It was 3 months plus before they stood me upright on the electric tilt table for the first time. I had my 15th major surgery as a result of that wreck this past January. So I had my daughter, Dana, had been born the same year I got out of law school in 78. And Dana was my only child for over 20 years. I have a wonderful 31-year-old son now. But I last laid eyes on Dana in January of 1980, and I didn't see or have any contact whatsoever with her for over 3 years. The Internal Revenue took my portion of the office building we built in downtown Louisville, a couple of things like that. The mortgage companies took the homes the ex-wives were in, and it was absolutely all gone. I was in some kind of asylum, and I don't use that word to be flip. Bill uses that word in the big book, and my mama used that word. When I was a kid, people didn't have emotional or mental problems and go to the hospital, nor did they have substance abuse issues and go to treatment. They went crazy and were put in asylums. And that's a whole lot more descriptive of what kept happening to me. As I say, to my recollection, I was in there 18 times. I'm pretty sure there were some more brief visits, but I can't remember them. I know about those 18 times. Young lady that was with me when I had the wreck, at the time of the wreck, I was remarried to my daughter's mother, which, by the way, over the years, I've decided probably establishes my alcoholism without further authentication. I just don't think a normie would do that. I think if they even considered jumping right back in a frying pan they just got out of, they'd tear the door off the asylum, getting in to protect themselves. And we do it willy-nilly, drunk and sober. You know, old Joe and Sue are divorced. They're dating, they'll probably get back together. And it works for us sometimes. It's not necessarily bad. It's just really different from ordinary people. Well, obviously, I got a brand new divorce after the wreck, and I married the young lady who was with me when I had the wreck. She was badly hurt, but she had on a seatbelt of all things and wasn't hurt as badly as I was. She had to leave me on account of insanity, and during that period, staying with some girlfriends that died in an accident. For about a year up until the fall of 1980, which was 6 months before I got sober, I did not have an address. I had no home, I had no car, I had no clothes, my teeth were rotting out of my head. I did not sleep under the bridge, but the only reason on earth I didn't was I could always get somebody to take me in, and it was frequently strangers. But at any rate, I had lost everything. I wound up getting sober in Nashville, Tennessee in April 1981. I got sober because the loving God that I had never acknowledged, much less asked for anything, began in April of 81, giving me the most precious gift that I've ever had. And that precious gift is with me today, and it saves and preserves and enhances my life today. It wasn't any sort of epiphany. It wasn't any change in my thoughts, feelings, and beliefs whatsoever. You see, that's what I've been trying to do. I knew the little part of me that wanted to live knew that the only outside chance I had of living was to somehow get this thing that you had. And it looked like to me that in order to get it, I had to somehow change my thoughts, feelings, and beliefs to make them more like it looked like to me you thought, felt, and believed. And I had tried as best I could, and I couldn't change any of them. I still had the same insane mixture of egomania and pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization I'd had for 3 years or 4 by that time. 1 minute, one of you guys would tell me how AA had saved your life, changed your life, and my brain would go, yeah, no, it works for you, but you don't really understand how intelligent and successful I am, and you don't understand that I see and understand things deeper than ordinary people. You know, I'm in my magnificence, I'm just wounded by my own understanding. So I might get tearful that it worked for you simple-minded folks, but I was doomed by my magnificence. And the nightmare of this illness is the very next minute one of you would tell me how AA had saved your life, changed your life, and that same brain would go, yeah, I know it works for you, but you don't know how bad I am. You don't know about the parts of me that are just missing and always have been. You don't understand that anything in my life that looks like it was even okay, much less good, is some kind of pack of lies in a house of cards. And you don't know how bad I've been. And there wasn't a lot of paranoia in that. I had practiced criminal defense law at a really high interstate level in that first 10 years I practiced. And I had become very unreliable. And it felt like to me that if I were to, by some miracle, stay sober a little while, might not be any need. I might be blown into by a sawed-off shotgun, or some chickens might come home to roost, and I'd spend the rest of my life somewhere I didn't want to spend the rest of my life. So the bottom line was it wouldn't work for me because I'm so bad. Very next minute it wouldn't work because I was so great again. But what God did begin to change is that in April of 1981, when I got sober, for the first time in my life, I began to voluntarily follow suggestions about how to run my life. Even though I didn't understand those suggestions, I didn't agree with them. I didn't think they would work, and I certainly did not want to do them. And folks, that gift of taking that action different from and better than the old crazy picture show in the back of my head is the only reason on earth that I'm with you, sweet folks, on this beautiful Saturday, instead of having been rotting in a pauper's grave for over 39 years. But at any rate, it was explained to me that if I wanted to get sober, one thing I was told, by the way, that really helped me, a couple months before I got sober, I was walking through a clubhouse in Nashville where I went to an awful lot of meetings 6 months before I got sober. I'd wound up in Nashville, Tennessee for my second to most recent asylum, number 17. And this group called gamblers, and Joe's been dead 15, 20 years, but he was about 6'5". And he walked up to me and looked way down and said, Don, I'm beginning to think you really are too intelligent for this program. And I thought he was giving me a compliment. My knee-jerk reaction was, well, thank God they've finally figured out who they're dealing with. But Joe went on, and it probably saved my life. He said, and that's a shame, Don, because we've never really had anybody too dumb for this program, and we bury you buttholes all the time. And that felt like an icy hand closing over something inside me. And I'm so grateful to my loving God that icy hand's never completely gone away. You let me get a couple of stitches off where I'm supposed to be, and so far I've felt the tips of those fingers, and it's slammed me right back into the onto the beam of Alcoholics Anonymous. But at any rate, I began praying, 100% acting as if. I had no idea why I was getting down there. I was embarrassed even though I was by myself. As far as I was concerned, I was talking to the wall, asking something that wasn't there to do something that couldn't be done. But I persisted. And I kept doing that. And I could count the times I've missed since I began in April of 81 on my 10 fingers. And there's nothing more important than my sobriety. And the twin miracles of the second step happened to me. The first one was, if I'd had to wait until I intellectually believed the second step, which is simply coming to a conclusion that there's some power outside human things that can get me out of the humanly hopeless dilemma I have just accepted I was in step one. If I'd had to wait for the mental penny to drop, I'd have been in the pauper's grave. The first of the miracles was when I began to behave like someone who believed the second step, I began to get all of the benefits of believing the second step. And the Siamese twin of that miracle, the second one, was that it turned out great, to my great shock, that faith and belief turned out to be exactly like everything else in my life. I've never one time thought my way into right acting. I've had to act my way into right thinking in everything good that's ever happened in my life. And as a result of taking that action consistent with believing that second step, I came to believe, and faith found me. But at any rate, got sober. They led me through the steps in Nashville. I lived there 21 months sober, unemployed, unemployable, happy I'd ever been in my life. Got it through my head. The third step was just a decision, a vital and crucial one, but just a decision. I took the action. That is the third step. I know when and where I did the third step and with whom. And I was taught that if you don't know that, you haven't done the third step. They led me through steps 4 and 5, and I formed a picture of what a spiritual dawn ought to look like. And I went back. By that time, I was living in an attic, and I didn't have a shelf to take the book down from to follow the directions exactly. So I laid it up on the bed and took it down from the bed. And I actually looked at my Timex watch and spent exactly 1 hour going through the first 5 steps. Looked like to me I wasn't summa cum laude by any means, but I'd made it well enough. So I got on my knees, said that 7th step prayer, the big book gives us about 40% of 1 page is the entire discussion in the first 164 pages of the big book of step 67. The top of page 76. And the 2 paragraphs include 7th step prayer. So I got down on my knees and I said the 7th step prayer. And I was convinced, believed with all my heart, that was where, with God's help, I'd gotten that far. That it was where, with God's help, I went to work on me to make me into what I had decided a spiritual don ought to be. And I held on. I'd not held on. I worked that into the ground for the first 9 years I was sober. And the first 9 years I was sober were they were magical from where I came from. As a result of 8 and 9, when I was about a year and a half sober, my law license got put in order. January of 1983, 21 months sober, terrified, only because I couldn't find a minimum wage job in Nashville. I came back to Louisville and started practicing law. And miracles just abounded. The second month I was in town, they stuck me up in front of 2,000 people to talk. The recordings of me started going around. People started asking me to speak everywhere, asking me to be their sponsor. I've always gone to 4 or 5 meetings a week, and I got it when I was told that it wouldn't work for me to try to fit AA into my life. And I've seen so many people fail trying to fit AA into their lives that if I was going to have this thing work for me, I was going to have to fit my life into Alcoholics Anonymous and let everything else revolve around that. And I did get that. That was another gift from God. But at any rate, that same month that they stuck me in front of all those people, I saw my daughter Dana for the first time. And 2 months later, she moved in with me, lived with me throughout her high school years. She and I are dear friends, text every day. She's been in Al-Anon 35 years, and occasionally we'll speak at the same event with her as an Al-Anon speaker, and me as an AA speaker, and we've got a great, great friendship. So all those wonderful things were happening, and my law practice started making some money, and I was, driving a nice car, wearing nice clothes, and things were pretty good, except the first 9 years I was sober, relationships with the women folks and financial chaos like to have killed me. They like to have beaten me to death. And my God, it was embarrassing. Here I was sponsoring a room full of people, standing up in front of audiences all over, everywhere, talking about spirituality and good things. And in my personal life, I was acting like a really fickle 13-year-old. If a lady that I found remotely attractive paid any attention to me, to pass a lie detector test, when I tearfully proclaimed undying love. And then 10 days, 2 weeks later, I'd wake up and think, if I don't get away from her right now, I'm going to die. I can't wait 10 minutes. I've got to get away from her right now. You keep on doing that. It will undermine your spiritual childhood. And with the financial thing, the more money that I began to make, the greater the chaos got. And I didn't have bad objectives. The objectives I had were good in the realm of relationships. I didn't want harem. I wanted a monogamous, sane relationship with a woman so that she and I could go about our business, me staying sober and whatever her spiritual business was, and live a spiritual, useful life together. With regard to the finances, I didn't want to be wealthy. I never really did want that, but I certainly didn't after sobriety. I just wanted the craziness to stop. I wanted the embarrassment to stop, pain to stop. And the tools I was using, I would use prayer, steps, meetings, sponsors, outside counseling from time to time, and whatever character defect was embarrassing me, making my self-centered but uncomfortable and inconsistent with my little idea of what a spiritual Don ought to be. I would figuratively grab that thing by the collar and put me some weight on it. I would slam it up against the wall and say, come here, God, just give me a little help and we'll get rid of this character defect. And God never showed up one single time in 9 years. And I had no idea what was wrong. Well, some things happened in May of 1990 when I was 9 years sober. What had happened, my original sponsor, Cherry Carpenter from Nashville, Tennessee, had died the previous winter. And I had spoken at some places with Tom B. from Avon Lake, Ohio. And I asked Tom if he'd be a sponsor. Tom said, yeah. And I was looking through the paper a few days later in Louisville, and I saw a special that Continental Airlines would fly you to Cleveland and back for $58. So I called Tom and said, can I come spend a weekend with you to kick off the sponsorship deal? And Tom said, sure. So we picked a weekend, and I flew to Cleveland. It turned out there was a Cleveland Akron AA golf tournament in Cleveland that weekend. So it was full, and Tom's house and world were full of serious sobriety. There's one old man that they said had drank with Dr. Bob. Somebody once asked me who it was, and I'm ashamed to say I was so dumbfounded I didn't even ask. But, but at any rate, it was a marvelous weekend. And if you had asked me when I got on the plane Sunday to come back to Louisville, what happened significantly this weekend, I would have mentioned some really serious discussion of steps 6 and 7. But I wouldn't have said, oh man, something that's going to change my life has happened. I've got a new realization of step 6 and 7 and of what that 7th step prayer really is. And I know that if I'll just live that realization, that God will take care of everything and take me to places that I couldn't even have dreamt of. You see, I've never seen a burning bush in full conflagration. And I've seen about 1,000 that were smoking some. But maybe 998 times out of that 1,000 or so, I've gone, aha, oh man, that's it. That's the epiphany. That's the secret. God, that's the key. Why couldn't I see that before? This is life-changing. I don't do anything about it. 2 or 3 weeks later, I don't even remember what it was. It doesn't amount to anything. But a couple of times, including this trip to Cleveland and the 6th and 7th step, I did what Bill did with that flash of light in his hotel room, or rather his hospital room, in December of 1934. I got out my bellows and I started giving air to that smoking bush. I started nurturing it. I started treating it like it was a burning bush. I began to talk about it as if it were a burning bush, and it burst into flames. And my point is, I am part and parcel of my own burning bushes. When I see a smoking bush, whether that amounts to anything in my life or not, depends solely on what I do with it. Bill wasn't at all sure what had happened, and that's what he told Dr. Silkworth the next morning. And Bill said, Dr. Silkworth said, I don't know either, Bill, but if I were you, I would hold on to it because it's got to be better than what you had. And Bill got out his bellows and he started fanning his smoking bush. And that is why we are here. But at any rate, I had some help on getting the bellows out on that smoking bush on 6 and 7. On Tuesday, after I got back in town on Sunday, I went to a noon meeting that I hadn't been to 2 or 3 years. And when I'd last been to it, it was a straight discussion meeting. And they had changed to a step meeting. They were talking about 6 and 7. That following weekend, I took the woman I was dating on the back of my motorcycle down to the Smoky Mountains for the weekend. I wanted to go to a meeting on Saturday. It was raining cats and dogs. Well, she had sense enough to stay in the hotel room, but I put on my rain gear and rode over 2 mountains to where there was supposed to be a meeting. Got there and there wasn't a meeting. I'm standing there in the rain, and a local cop drives by, and I flagged him down, asked him if he knew where the AA meeting was. Said, no, I don't know, but this old retired nun that lives down the road will know. So I followed him down there, and she told me, and I went to the meeting, walked in when it was halfway over, like a drowned rat dripping water everywhere. It was a step meeting. They were talking about 6 and 7. So I got some help. And what happened was, you see, I'd been told that weekend in Cleveland by some old heads that sober about 9 or 10 years, and I was sober 9 at that time. Old guy told me that's about the time most folks begin to really look at 6 and 7. Now, my reaction to that was internally, you old fool, I've listened to over 100 fifth steps. I know, you know, talking to me, of course I know about 6 and 7. Turns out he was right. Now, You don't have to wait until you're sober 9 to 10 years. You can do it right to start with. But if you blow past 6 and 7 the way I do, with the misconceptions that I lived with and carried out for 9 years, it usually is about 9 or 10 years when you hit a brick wall. And you have to go back and revisit it, whatever you name it. In my view, it's a revisiting of 6 and 7. And they have been the most important steps in my life every day of my life since May of 1991. I began to realize, and I love the word realize. I had always thought before I got sober that to know something and to realize it were essentially interchangeable. You know, I know that, I realize that. But they're not even in the same league. Realize is a form of the word real. When I have realized something, that literally means it has become real inside me. There's all sorts of stuff I've known for 60 years that has not been brought into reality inside me yet. But I began to realize a lot of things about 6 and 7. One of the first things I began to realize was my total mistake with regard to perfection. I had thought all my life that my problem with perfection was my inability to attain perfection. But I know now that that's never really mattered because we don't get there. My problem comes way before that. I'm totally unable to recognize perfection. I wouldn't know perfection if it came riding in front of me on a motor scooter. At 76 years old and 39 years sober, if God came down and said, Don, I want you to tell me exactly who and what you're supposed to be the rest of your life, and I'm going to make you that. I'd be like a blind dog in a butcher shop. I wouldn't have any idea what to tell God. I don't know what perfection is. And that little self-determined objective I had of what I thought a spiritual Don would be, my God, what arrogance to think that I would know what God and who God would have me be. It turned out that what I thought was the guide for my self-improvement with God's help was just another self-determined objective. For me to pray for a character defect to be gone because I want it gone, because it's inconsistent with who I think I ought to be, because it's making me uncomfortable, is exactly the same spiritual mistake as praying for a bright red Ferrari. It's praying for my own selfish ends. You see, I could have quoted probably, if you'd given me a few minutes, the 7-step prayer to you backwards. I knew exactly what it said, but I didn't realize what it really meant. That it doesn't ask God to remove all my defects of character. And it surely does not ask God to remove the ones that are inconsistent with my idea of a spiritual Don. And it sure doesn't ask God to help me while I work on these character defects. Help me remove them. It asks God simply to remove only the character defects that stand in the way of my usefulness to God and the people around me. And folks, I have no idea which character defects they are. When my phone rings today and somebody asks me to be their sponsor or give a talk or that they want to talk to me about something, I'd say more than half the time, a big part of the reason that they dial in my phone is that because I went through so much pain and embarrassment in sobriety and somehow managed not to drink and somehow managed to stay in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous and wound up getting in a place where God could take me to better things. But when I was going through all that embarrassment and frustration, it looked like it was just totally anti-spiritual, anti-carrying the message, anti-everything's the way it looked to me. But God's a real master at making chicken salad out of my chicken do, you know. And God takes my mistakes and my shortcomings, my character defects, and God weaves them into God's beautiful tapestry as long as I cooperate by trying to take that next stitch in the right place. And it turns out that it's not just 6 and 7. That all that high-minded about, you know, we're not talking about getting rid of the character defects that are making me uncomfortable. We just want you to remove the ones that stand in the way of our usefulness. It's the heart of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Up until I was 9 years sober, I knew the words that my AA hero, Chuck Chamberlain, said when he would say things like, you know, if you're doing this for yourself and to stay sober and to be spiritual and happy, that's fine. You may stay sober and may work out okay, but you're going to rob yourself. You're going to rob yourself of the real treasures that these 12 steps in this AA way of life can give you. Because I know now that what Chuck was talking about, that is the spine and the backbone of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not just 6 and 7. The third step prayer, take away my difficulties, not so I can be spiritual and sober and happy. Take away my difficulties that victory over them will bear witness to those I would help of God's power, love, and way of life. Steps 8 and 9, all practical about putting our lives in order, right? Look on page 77. It says, yeah, we're doing that, but that's not our real purpose. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and those around us. So I began to realize that I needed to let go of this idea that I can figure out the patterns of my life. That's playing God. I'm 76 years old and haven't figured out a single significant pattern correctly. My job is stitching. And I began to realize some really, really important things. I began to realize just how limited my knowledge and power are. Part of my morning prayer every day in my morning routine is to reinforce for me that the only glimpse of God's will I ever get, only really truly valid glimpse I ever get, is in the absolute right now for my own next action. And the only power I have ever had in this universe, or I will ever have, is over that next action. And the beautiful thing is, that's knowledge and power aplenty. If I reject that and think my knowledge and power are beyond that, I truly am an ant on a log floating down the river. And the stupid ant thinks he's steering the log. He's driving him or herself crazy, running back and forth, trying to steer this log. Meantime, he's ignoring the little ant crap that he should be doing and could be doing in front of him. Whereas if he'd pay attention to that, the log's going where it's going anyway, but the ant be a whole bunch better off. So I've got a choice. Either I accept that my knowledge of will and my power is limited to that, or I'm the ant on the log. And today I choose to seek to be the guy that accepts the limitations. You know, we assume that it'll be God's will 5 seconds from now for me to be going on, and probably some of you might wonder, this guy going for a long time. But the truth is, we could spend the rest of today and tonight coming up with things that would absolutely change what we are convinced God's will be 5 seconds from now. Everything from technical difficulties to nuclear war and everything in between that could totally change it. And yet I want to study about God's will for next Tuesday and 10 years from now. A chimpanzee has a better chance of mastering quantum physics than I do comprehending and predicting the patterns of my life. My job is stitching, to listen to that spark of the divine. And my sponsor, Bob, referred to that yesterday as it's the knower, N-O-W-E-R. It's that thing inside us that's not intellect, it's not emotion, but it's that thing inside of us that knows that next right stitch only. I really don't have any trouble with God's will until I get out of that one stitch. When I start looking 3 or 4 stitches down the line and think about, well, we have this, that, that's when my brain jumps in with my fear and my other character defects and jumps in and clouds God's will for me. But if I keep it that simple to where I am one stitch at a time, things unfold. I have stumbled in the direction of trying to live life that way for over 30 years now. And it's really important to me that I tell you how well I think I've done on that. I don't think there's been one single day that if you had asked me, Don, have you done this step 6 and 7 thing well enough today that it will do any good, that I would have said anything like, I think I may have gotten over the bar with it today. Yeah. Every single day I would have said, oh no. No, I failed so many times. I'd take a couple of steps in the right direction, get knocked over by self-will, and I start over 50 or 100 times. And I thought every time that happened, it was an interruption of my spiritual growth. But I know now that process of failing and saying, oops, Mom, Dad, I'm sorry, and getting back on the right stitching is the only spiritual growth of which I am capable. And it seems like my God is just really happy and fine with that. What I think what makes 6 and 7 so terribly difficult for us is first, it is so simple that our egos and brains just revolt at it. That the entire key to a successful, useful, happy, spiritual life can be that simple and require so little of our wonderful intellects. And the other reason, which is very connected with that, is kind of a death of self, because it's been ingrained in all of us that this whole thing was about, by God, seeing what we wanted, grabbing the bull by the horns and making that happen, and letting go of the idea that we can do that successfully. Even if we make what happens, something happen that looks like what we had in mind, there'll be something. It won't feel like we thought it was going to feel. Or maybe when we get more just becomes some, and we still have to have more. So it's so hard for us to accept that. And I think that's the problem with it. That it's just so simple that it's hard. And I want to wind up by telling you how it has worked in my life in the last 30 years, despite the fact that I've done it so poorly. And by the way, in case I don't mention it otherwise, I always like to mention this. I think the 2 most underrated and under-discussed spiritual principles of all are courtesy and persistence. With regard to persistence, perfection is just not on my menu. Persistence is the whole thing. The journey is the destination. There ain't no big rock candy mountain at the end of this deal. It's a matter of persisting, doing the best I can a day at a time, thinking about other people other than myself, using the St. Francis prayer dozens of times during the day in my mind. Lord, let me lay aside whether I get any love, comfort, and understanding out of this. And that includes making sure you respect me. That includes making sure you don't step on my rights back on, because it's a spiritual law. If any part of me is coming from there, I will not be loved, comforted, and understood to my satisfaction. Can't happen. If you do exactly what I thought I wanted you to do before you're done, I'll change it. The only way it's possible for me to ever be loved, comforted, and understood to my satisfaction is when I lay aside my demand to get it. And I run that prayer through my head until I succeed in giving you my entire interest, attention, and love. And succeed in just for a little while in letting you become more important than I am to me. And when that happens, it's just miraculous. It's like angel dust or something gets sprinkled on relationships. You can feel the atmosphere in the room change. I can. When I remember to pray that and I get that shift, when I'm no longer thinking about what I'm going to say, how it's going to sound, what I'm going to look, what I'm going to do next Tuesday, making sure I look like I'm listening well enough to respond. When instead of that, I'm really giving my entire interest, attention, and love to another human being. It's just miraculous. And May of 1990, the same month I began on this track on 67, I began dating my precious Sharon, and we have been together 30 years now. Been married 29. And we have had no intervening divorces or separations, and we've never had an argument. And I sponsor some guys that are psychologists and counselors, and they tell me that's not healthy. And I tell them that they're welcome to their healthy relationships. Thank you. I'm doing just fine with this. In fact, if anybody has caught me arguing with anybody for over 30 years, it was because somebody was paying me to do that argument. I will not argue with you for nothing and make my belly hurt over the totally insignificant issue of who's right. I don't give a crap who's right. And you kind of borrow it from unofficial Al-Anon. One of the most useful phrases in my vocabulary lexicon is, I don't know, you may be right. Just let that ball bounce between my legs and go right on. I don't want to carry any conversations on longer than they need to be by making my point, by George. But at any rate, I couldn't have envisioned anything like my sweet Sharon in the life that we have together. And God took me there, and all that I really did was let go of my objectives and seek to love, comfort, and understand Sharon. And the other spiritual principle I mentioned of courtesy. Lord, that's so important in every level. And it's important, it's so sad that often it's easier for us to become courteous with strangers than with the people that we live with that are closest to us. And, you know, every little sharp remark, even if it's flying under the flag of humor, leaves a mark. It really does leave a mark. And Sharon and I are unfailingly courteous to one another. And I think that's a big piece of the success of our relationship and love. We also never, ever keep score. We each would like to give the other 99% out of 100%. And consequently, I get 100 and I get 1,000% from my sweet Sharon. And it just works out beautifully. The bar association that I had so disgraced and embarrassed, and I only say this because my dear friend Billy is actually sitting across the room with me. We had something we do together on Saturday afternoons that I had to interrupt to do this. And Billy and some other guys I sponsored told me I have to talk about this. The bar association that I so disgraced that led me in grudgingly by one lousy little vote of the Board of Governors and in the fall of 1982, let me back in, has honored me until it's embarrassing. They've called me and said, come to the bar dinner, Don. You're the pro bono lawyer of the year. They've called me and said, Don, we want you to be a master at the end of court. And then after I'd done that for 20 years, I said, we want you to be one of only 3 masters emeritus ever at the Inn of Court in Louisville, in Kentucky. They said, come to the bar dinner. We want to give you the award for professionality and civility, which is the most coveted award at the bar. And God's got such a sense of humor. Probably 15 years ago or more, I was sitting in the barber chair and the cell phone rang, and it was the president of the state bar. And he said, Don, we have got an opening on the ethics committee. The first 10 years I practiced law, the only people I was more afraid of than the state bar ethics committee were the IRS and the FBI. It's a beautiful, beautiful way of life. And I so appreciate, Phil, you asking me, and Mike, you taking care of the conference of the recording, and then be with you guys. God bless, and have a great rest of the conference and a great weekend.